Alright, so there was a recent interview from Famitsu where they sat down and talked with Tetsuya Nomura, Yoshinori Kitase, and Naoki Hamaguchi about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And we have a lot more clarification on the ending of the game, things like the Forgotten Capital, why the game is going to be a trilogy, why Rebirth has 2 discs, and even Zack's involvement in the story. So if any of that sounds cool to you, or if you're new here, feel free to click the like button and subscribe if you'd like to stick around. It's always appreciated. So again, this interview is from Famitsu, and it was translated by Audrey on Twitter, so thank you to her for going through the work of translating the article so we could all read it in English. In the article itself, they ask Nomura about the ending of the game, the Forgotten Capital, and he goes on to say that while he can't exactly say what happens, he does clarify a few things. He goes on to say, "What I can say is that even though Rebirth will end at the Forgotten Capital, the events and locations you visit will not necessarily be in the same order as the original game. There are several areas that are switched up, and some will even appear in the 3rd game instead. Even if some locations do not appear in Rebirth, it does not mean those locations are cut from the game completely." So that right there, that's confirmation. Yeah, the Forgotten Capital is in fact the ending of the game. And it sounds like, based on what he's saying, the Forgotten Capital was one of the locations that had its order switched up. So that's now going to be at the end of the game. I also wouldn't be surprised if the location of the Forgotten Capital has been changed from being near Bone Village to maybe somewhere further in the map along maybe the northern crater, maybe not necessarily inside of the northern crater, but somewhere around it, because it kind of makes sense for the ending of Rebirth to take place in that area, not just because of what happens at the Forgotten Capital, but subsequent events with Cloud and Sephiroth and the Black Materia. Now, Nomura also did mention before that some locations would not be in Rebirth. I think one of the locations he said was Wutai, so we won't see Wutai in Rebirth. Yuffie won't be visiting that there, but we will see that in Part 3. They continue, "Along with the 3rd installment in the 7 Remake series, will we be able to visit all original locations?" Nomura responds, "Yes, from the early planning stages, we did not necessarily decide on a trilogy, more so than I just wanted to make sure none of the original game's locations were removed from the Remake series. Even if the order that locations are visited will be changed, or if there are changes to the amount of content, I definitely wanted to avoid removing any of the OG's locations." This I very much appreciate. A lot of developers, when remaking stuff, they'll cut out specific sections of a game. Resident Evil 3 Remake pops into my head immediately. There was a complete section of the original game, the clock tower, that was not in the remake version. It was just completely removed, and there was a lot of things removed in Resident Evil 3 Remake that just didn't sit right with people. So the fact that they actually said, hey, we want to keep every single location from the original Final Fantasy VII in this game, we're gonna do that, even if it means turning it into a trilogy or switching up the locations of some of these orders. There's not gonna be any cut content, so that I very much appreciate. They go on to talk further about the Forgotten Capital. "Since FF7 Rebirth will be ending at the Forgotten Capital, is that the reason why the game is on 2 discs? Nomura says, "That is part of the reason. When we were deciding if we wanted to make the 7 Remake series into a 2-part game or a trilogy, we discussed if we were to go with a trilogy, the 2nd installment must end at the Forgotten Capital. The 1st installment already had so much content that it almost did not fit on 1 disc, so when it became apparent that the 2nd installment would be even bigger, we decided early on that we needed to make the game on 2 discs. And that just speaks to how large this game is going to be. In our previous video, Naoki Hamaguchi clarified statements in regards to the open world and how it will eventually be one seamless location with dungeons and towns and enemies to fight, but you're going to be working your way through that stuff and unlocking different regions of the game, which is how the original Final Fantasy VII worked and how most open world games work. So it's not a situation where you start at the beginning of the game and you can run all the way to the end. You got to work through all the story stuff, get to places like Calm, get to the Chocobo Ranch before you can progress into the open world and unlock more stuff. And based on the stuff we've seen so far, there's a lot in this game. And 2 discs doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a long game, but it just means that there's a lot of data that has to be processed. And if they're trying to include as many locations as possible, especially in an open world environment, then yeah, you really do need that extra disc to fit as much data as possible without making any type of compromise. But it also kind of makes me wonder if the Forgotten Capital will be expanded upon a little bit more, if it's not just a location where we just go, see something happen, and then we leave. There might be a little bit more going on in that spot of the game. And just to elaborate a little bit more on them not saying what exactly happens at the Forgotten Capital, obviously, again, spoiler warning, but in the original game, that's where Aerith dies. But I could totally see something happening in Rebirth that makes people's jaws drop, because they've talked about having a cliffhanger sort of ending for Rebirth, and I wouldn't be shocked if Aerith does in fact survive the Forgotten Capital this go around. You know, a character like Cloud has been receiving visions of stuff that's happened in what I believe to be a previous timeline. He has seen aspects of Aerith's death, but he doesn't know for sure that it's her. And we could have a situation where maybe Cloud gets another vision, and at the last minute he steps in, saves her from Sephiroth, and now Aerith is alive, and she gets to spend more time with our party, which is really cool because in the original, Aerith didn't really have much time to bond with characters like Cid and Vincent. So if she could potentially stay around a little bit longer, talk more with Cid, talk more with Vincent, really form a stronger bond with the entire party, I think that's beneficial to the story. Now, I do think that eventually Aerith will realize in order to make things right, she does have to die. Cloud altered something that he wasn't supposed to, and she realizes, I need to sacrifice myself if you guys are going to beat Sephiroth this time around, which I think could potentially happen if she does in fact survive her fate. Eventually, she's going to have to die. Moving on a little bit further, they ask Kitase and Nomura about Zack's involvement in this game. They say, it seems like Zack is the key to this installment of the Remake project. Can you expand a little bit more on this? We start first with Nomura. As you play through 7 Rebirth, the mysteries from the previous game will unravel to some extent. Zack is an important figure that holds the key to these mysteries, so please play the game and see what happens. However, as you play through the game, there will be new mysteries that run parallel at the same time. Kitase continues, I can't explain in details as that will go into spoiler territory, but the flow of events from the OG will mostly remain the same. Similar to 7 Remake, there will be elements in the story that will make you go, wait, what? With that being said, I think those elements will probably be more at the forefront than in the previous game. So that's pretty in line with, again, what they did with Remake. For the most part, the story was the same, but there were new things injected into the story. They also were able to include elements of the compilation in a way that worked really well. You know, when Cloud, Tifa, and Barret head back to the Shinra building, Cloud runs into a guy he used to know, and that guy goes, holy crap, you're alive. I'm gonna go get Kunsel. Kunsel being someone from Crisis Core that knew Zack. So even looking at the Yuffie DLC, integrating a character like Weiss in Deep Ground, they did it in a way that worked, that was technically new, but it was woven into the new fabric of the story in this new iteration of the game that made sense. So like Chadley, for example, he's a newbie. He wasn't in the original. But as far as Zack goes, I think this pretty much just confirms that, yeah, Zack's story will be running parallel to what Cloud and his party are doing. What's Zack's goal gonna be? We still don't know. We don't know who his big bad is gonna be. It could be Sephiroth, maybe Genesis pops up out of nowhere and decides to take on Zack, but we do know that Zack will have that running parallel story. Almost kind of in a way, I talked about Zack maybe being kind of like the Laguna of this game, where if you haven't played Final Fantasy VIII, the main character is Squall, but there were sections in the game where Squall and his party would just fall unconscious, and it would switch over to a character by the name of Laguna and his party, and we would play as them for a little while. And they did mention that Zack will have his own episode in Rebirth, so it's entirely possible that Zack is like the Laguna. We might switch back to him from time to time, or there could just be a section of the game that's devoted completely to Zack and what he's doing. That could be a big chunk of Rebirth, and then once we finish that, we jump on over back to Cloud and our party in this main timeline. And based on how they're hyping this up, it definitely sounds like Zack's role is going to be super important, and he could be one of the keys to help stopping Sephiroth this time around. And of course, I'm super excited to see what Zack's combat is going to be. I made a video a very long time ago just kind of speculating on what his combat style could be, what his abilities could be. Could they potentially take aspects of Crisis Core's combat system like the DMW and integrate it into his section of Rebirth? The music, for example, too. Could we hear some Crisis Core battle themes playing in Zack's section? Who's Zack's party gonna be? Is he gonna team up with the Turks? People from Crisis Core, like Cisne, she's gotta come back at some point. So There's so many possibilities going on here. It's hard to speculate on what exactly could happen because anything could literally happen, but that was the gist of that interview from Famitsu. Again, thank you to Audrey for taking the time out of her day to translate that for us so we could all read it and just kind of continue to speculate and make content. It's always appreciated. So with that being said, let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think about these comments about the Forgotten Capital, in fact, being confirmed to be the very end of the game, the order of locations potentially changing, and what do you guys think is going on with Zack? What is Zack's involvement going to be in Rebirth? Will it be massive? Will it be a little side mission? Let me know in the comments down below. I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.